Misplaced Monk here. Captain Marvel vs. Iron Man Beef History Part 1. Here we go. So this beef history picks up ever so slightly in the summer of 1998. We see Tony Stark arriving at the childhood home of Carol Danvers in Beverly, Massachusetts. He is greeted by Carol's mother, who reveals that Carol has been staying with her and Carol's father for a while. After being led to Carol's room, Tony would knock and then enter. Carol was surprised to see him and asked if Captain America sent him. Tony would admit to being sent, but he and the Avengers were concerned about her and for her. So to give this brief exchange some context, we have to go back a few weeks ago. During a battle against another super team led by Hyperion called Squadron Supreme, the Avengers were on the losing side. Multiple members were down and Thor was being double teamed. Wanting to aid Thor, Cap would tell Carol, now going by Warbird, to switch to her binary form and lend Thor a hand. Carol would fly to Thor's aid, but she didn't switch form. Cap would yell to Carol that she couldn't face Hyperion unless she switched forms. Carol would then be sent flying through the air from a powerful right hook. As Carol sailed away, Scarlet Witch wondered if Carol lost her powers, and if she did, why didn't she say anything? Later, while on board the Quinjet, Cap would tell Carol he'd like to speak with her. He simply wanted to know why she didn't go binary when the team desperately needed her to do so. Uncharacteristically, Carol would quickly become defensive, saying,
"Save me from men who don't think women should be able to think independently. They're my powers. I'll be the judge of how best to use them. Just butt out and I'll do my job. Got it?"
Cap was about to retort, but Tony would tell him to chill and that he'll talk to her later. Back in Beverly, Massachusetts, Tony would take notice of one of Carol's model planes. She would tell him she loved the speed, power, and sheer beauty of the Warbirds. At this time, Tony would reveal his face to Carol for the first time while wearing his Iron Man suit, stating that he might be able to help her. After getting over the shock of Tony being Iron Man, she would ask him if he could fix someone who had everything but lost it all. "What do you mean?" asked Tony. Carol would confess to Tony that her binary powers had gone haywire while she was in space. Carol and the X-Men thought they could solve the problem after re-energizing the white hole, the source from which she drew her powers, but they were wrong. Carol would say,
"Whether it's the white hole or my link to it, my powers have faded to a fraction of what they once were."
She lost everything on Earth, only to lose the stars as well.
"I thought I could find a place for myself, be an Avenger. No matter what Captain America tries."
Tony would jump to defend Cap, saying he's not trying anything. Tony would go on to say he'll never understand what all her trauma has been like for her, but he does know about stress and how overwhelming it can get. Iron Man would then pick up a beer bottle and ask Carol, "Has alcohol been a part of dealing with things?" Outraged, Carol would suit up and flex on Tony.
"It's easy, isn't it? You're an alcoholic, so anyone you know who drinks must be an alcoholic too?"
Tony was shocked by this sudden outburst, but before he could reply, Carol continued,
"Sure, I take a drink or two, but it doesn't affect me, not for long. The energy in my metabolism burns it off right away."
"Come on, Carol. You don't really believe that," replied Tony. Carol would reach her breaking point.
"Get out, Tony, before I rip that armor off and throw you back to New York. I'm not what I was, but I don't have to take this."
Seeing that Carol wasn't in a listening mood, he decided to leave. Later on that day, Tony had a meeting with a former manager of Stark Industries Cincinnati. Her name was Victoria Snow. Tony believed that Snow had information that could aid him in an investigation he was conducting. In short, there was a recent terrorist attack, and the clues pointed to one of Snow's clients as the suspect. Snow was being very closed-lipped, stating a client's information is confidential. While Tony continued questioning Snow, Carol came crashing through the office window. Clearly drunk, Carol would grab Tony by the neck.
Thought you could just drive off and go tell Cap I'm a drunk? I'm not gonna let you sandbag me!
Tony would try talking Carol down, telling her that violence isn't the way. These words seemed to suddenly bring Carol out of her drunken stupor, causing her to apologize to Tony. But right as Tony was about to speak, a group of Kree warriors entered the office. It is then revealed that Snow had been aiding these Kree warriors in their recent attack. Carol crashing through the window caused the Kree to panic, thinking the Avengers were attacking, causing them to prematurely reveal themselves. Snow would then yell at one of the Kree soldiers named Dylon, telling him she had the situation under control, thereby admitting to having a hand in the recent attack. As Snow and Dylon spoke, Tony would signal for Carol to blow a hole through the floor using one of her blasts, giving them time to escape. Tony used this brief moment to suit up and become Iron Man. On his way back up to aid Carol, he would say to himself, handling an alien invasion with an inebriated partner makes me nervous. Once by Carol's side, she would call out to him saying,
I've got them pinned down. I'm drawing fire to cover the civilians' escape. There's practically nothing for you to do. Not bad for someone you were calling a lush.
Tony would respond by saying, let's not focus on our differences, let's just get the job done. As they finally pulled together and started working as a unit, they were blindsided by a powerful blast of energy. Its source, a Kree robot warrior named Sentry 571. As the duo recovered from the blast, Dylon would inform them that the building was set to explode. Soon after, the Sentry would create an energy field encasing the entire building, trapping everyone inside. Carol would inform Tony that the only way to shut down the energy field is to shut down the Sentry. They would attempt to attack the Sentry head on, but they were swallowed away like flies. Then they crashed through the floor into the lower level. Before they could recover, the Sentry would grab Warbird and attempt to end Iron Man with a hammer fist. Tony would then tell Carol that the Kree warriors made off with a device that could be bad for the whole planet. Hearing this, Carol would say,
All this because I got blitzed? Because I busted in here and set this off? No, it can't be that way. I won't let it! Somebody's got to stop them, and it's going to be me!
Once free of the Sentry's grasp, Carol would fly head-on into the energy field. Through sheer will and her ability to absorb energy, Carol forced herself through the unbreakable energy field to retrieve the device. This would leave Iron Man alone with the Sentry, but Tony would end the battle by crouching low, then exploding upward, smashing the Sentry's head to pieces. With the Sentry down, so went the energy field. Tony soon was able to catch up with Carol and the Kree ship, but as Iron Man was closing the distance, he could hear the groaning of the building's metal frame giving way. Tony would then tell Carol that lives were in danger in the building, essentially telling her to abort the chase. Carol would tell Tony to save the people. She's going to catch the Kree and prove herself. It was standard Avenger procedure to save innocents first and catch bad guys later, but Tony had no time to argue. Luckily, Iron Man would stop a giant generator from crushing the building's staff, saving the day. Snow would later be arrested, and as Tony watched the police car drive off, he hoped he wasn't losing his friend Carol as he just lost his friend Snow. After stopping some criminals from committing arson, Cap received an Avenger alert from Warbird. She would tell him she's pinned down by Kree soldiers near Cape Canaveral and needs backup. As Cap headed out to assist Carol, he found it odd that she called him rather than call the entire team. He wondered if she was seeking his approval due to her recent field performance. He knew her powers were on the wane, and he wondered how long she could last on her own. In Florida, Carol was surrounded and didn't have much energy left. Carol's plan was to find cover and wait for backup, but before she could, she would be shot down and knocked unconscious. The Kree would then capture her. The Kree's plan was to enslave the human race. In order to do this, they planned to mix Carol's hybrid Kree-human DNA with Terrigen Mist, then gas the Earth's population with the mixture, turning humans into mindless slaves. Carol would regain consciousness to the sound of screams, the screams of prisoners being gassed. She couldn't break free, so all she could do was hopelessly watch and shout for someone to help them. Enter Captain America to answer Carol's call. The prisoners would rush the exit as Cap freed Carol. Once outside, Carol would tell Cap about the fight in Boston and her chasing the Kree to Florida due to the fact that they stole a device that could destroy humanity. Carol would continue by telling Cap that the Kree soldiers, who call themselves the Lunatic Legion, has a base on the moon, which is why they were at Cape Canaveral. They were preparing to head back to the moon.
It's up to us to stop them.
Us and the other Avengers. Where are they? Asked Cap. Carol would say she thought herself and Cap would be enough for this mission, so she didn't call them. Angered by this, Cap would attempt to alert the Avengers.
It's too late. The Kree have jammed outgoing signals. We're on our own. But I know together we can handle them.
After the duo won a small battle, Carol would inform Cap that the Kree were preparing for liftoff, and the launch flame will fill the silo, killing the prisoners. Cap would then tell Carol that innocence comes first always.
But the Kree!
Get away, because we have enough Avengers to stop them and save these people.
You act like this is my fault!
Isn't it? You didn't call the Avengers because you wanted to impress me. You wanted my approval, but it's not coming. Get your head together and start acting like an Avenger. Carol would say she gets the message and tells Cap to get the people out while she avenges the death of the gassed prisoners. As she flew towards the ship, Cap would shout, "Stop trying to prove yourself!" Bullheaded, Carol flew towards the ship only to be captured in some sort of tractor beam. Unknown to Carol, the Kree had no intention of leaving without her, and she fell into their trap. Cap would see this, wondering what happened to Carol's judgment. Although he didn't want to abandon her, Cap and the prisoners had to vacate the area, lest they be burned alive. As they recovered, one of the prisoners asked if Carol was going to be okay. "I'll make sure of it. You have my word." True to his word, Cap would dispatch Quicksilver, Scarlet Witch, and Hawkeye to rescue Carol. With the aid of Lockjaw, the Inhuman canine with the ability to teleport, the heroes would appear underneath the blue area of the moon in front of the Supreme Intelligence. The Supreme Intelligence would then ramble on about a past event, to which Quicksilver would yell, "I don't care about any of that. You will return Carol Danvers to us now." Unmoved by the request, the Supreme Intelligence would reveal that Carol's DNA is needed, along with an Omniwave projector, to enslave the human race, since the gas procedure failed. The Supreme Intelligence would then show the heroes Carol's condition over a monitor, which wasn't good. The Kree scientists that was working on Carol would say in frustration, "You're pathetic, Danvers. Your addiction to alcohol has made you weak. Already your withdrawal symptoms keep you from escaping." Quickly taking charge, Silver would tell Hawkeye and Wanda to disable the Omniwave projector while he finds Carol. After locating the lab and taking out the guards watching her, Silver would free Carol. Carol at this point was in a bad state of alcohol withdrawal, so much so that she couldn't walk under her own power. Silver would tell her that he knows about her addiction, then asked if Cap knows about it. She would say not to say anything and that it was a problem she could handle. Suddenly, the alarm would go off, prompting Silver to stash Carol in a side room, saying, "You stay here. You're no use to anyone the way you are now." Carol would try to reassure him that she could be of use, but Silver wasn't buying it. "Not as you are. You're a liability. I'll come back for you." After he left, Carol would rise to her feet, upset with everyone who didn't understand that her binary powers were fading.
All I need is one drink, then I'll be alright.
Carol would happen to see Kree alcohol on a table.
Just need a little something to stop the shakes. That'll be okay. Then I can help.
Carol would finish the entire container, then transform into her suit, shouting,
"Whoa! That's better. Warbird is ready for action!"
As Quicksilver Wanda, and Hawkeye worked to disarm the Omniwave projector's power generator, entered drunk Carol.
Warbird's here, crushing the Kree and blowing up the generator.
Quicksilver would tell Carol to stop. You're drunk. You're not in control.
Don't need control. Got powers, see?
As Carol said this, she fired multiple photon beams in all directions, recklessly, even hitting Lockjaw with one of them.
Now for the generator.
Soon after, she destroyed the generator with a very powerful blast. The blast was so powerful that the force blew Carol back and tore a hole in the moon's surface. Inside the base, the ceiling was collapsing and they were losing oxygen fast. Wanda would use a hex to keep the air in, but not for long. Carol would soon lose consciousness and start to fall. Silver thought to let her fall after her recklessness, but he figured having to answer to Captain America and the other Avengers would be a worse fate. Once the team was together, Silver would tell Lockjaw to get them out of there. Later at the Avengers mansion, Silver would have words with Carol. You have to answer for your actions. They are not up to the standards expected of an Avenger.
Look, I'm sorry your puppy was hurt, but I stopped the Kree. That should be all that matters. So don't lecture me.
But little did Carol know she would have to answer for her actions. Due to Carol's recent misconduct, Cap was forced to call a special tribunal regarding her fitness to serve as an Avenger. Iron Man would ask Cap if this had to be so formal. She left us no choice. For her sake and the team's, we have to act. Since Cap was going to give testimony, he turned over leadership to Thor. Before Thor began questioning, he would tell Carol that even though she is a brave and true warrior, grave charges have been brought against her. Alcoholism has made her derelict in her duties and a danger to herself and the team. Thor would conclude by asking Carol to let the team help her triumph over this. Carol's face showed her appreciation. Thor would then question Iron Man about his reservations about adding Carol to the team, at which point Tony would talk about the bar incident. So a few months ago, before all this went down, the Avengers were overstaffed. So in order to reduce the team's size, founding members were conducting interviews to see who would make the final cut. We see Carol behind the bar at Avengers Mansion. She hadn't landed on the new name of Warbird just yet, so she pondered on a new name as she eyed the various bottles of liquor. As she's doing this, Tony walks in, which surprises her. He tells her that the panel is ready to see her. Carol would then tell Tony that she was merely making sure the bar was well stocked for the press conference later, because she knows how reporters can drink. As she headed off to the meeting, Tony wasn't concerned that she was behind the bar. It was the fact that she felt a need to make an excuse about it. After all the interviews had been conducted, the panel began to finalize the team's roster. But as Cap brought up Carol's name, Tony would say, "Not Carol, Cap. I don't think she's a good idea." When asked why not, he would say, "I'd rather not say at this point, but I have reservations." The team would then defend Carol, with Thor stating, "I would not hear any insubstantial charges against her." After hearing the team's feedback, Tony would withdraw his reservations. Back at the tribunal, Tony would wrap up his statement. "She made an excuse, pretended she hadn't been drinking, and that made me suspect she might have a problem."
What? You mean you were talking against me from the start? Poisoning others against me?
Thor would demand silence, then ask Iron Man why he still voted her on the team. Iron Man would say it wouldn't have been fair to voice such concerns on flimsy evidence. After this, we get a montage of Carol's past transgressions, not disclosing her waning powers, attacking Tony in a drunken rage, lying about calling for backup and getting captured as a result, and lastly, endangering the lives of her teammates due to drunkenness. The testimonies would end with Quicksilver stating that Carol's behavior was unprofessional, incompetent, and far below the standards expected of an Avenger. Thor would tell Silver to be silent and that in spite of the circumstances, Carol has long since earned honor rather than scorn. Following that, Thor would then allow Carol to speak in her defense. Shockingly, Carol would say all of it was a load of crock from beginning to end. She would say everyone makes mistakes. She felt as though she was doing well. She exposed the Kree and destroyed their weapons power unit. She would admit she should have disclosed her power loss, but she was afraid. She already lost her memories, which severed her connections to family and friends. She then lost the stars, referring to her binary powers.
I didn't want to risk losing my Avenger membership as well. Now you want to label me an alcoholic because I take a drink now and then? Try to throw me off the team? If it wasn't for me, everyone would be speaking Kreevian right now!
The council would stare at Carol in disbelief as Thor asked, "Is that thy defense?" Seeing no other choice, Thor would then call for a vote, either for or against Carol being demoted to inactive status. Cap would vote for until such time Carol is capable of serving us once more. Iron Man would vote for. You don't just take one drink now and then, Carol. Until you can admit that, I'm sorry. Vision would vote for, saying once Carol overcomes her issues, she'll return stronger. Hawkeye voted for, rehashing her actions on the moon. A very sad Wanda would recall her and Carol's friendship and piggyback on Vision's words. But before she could vote, Vision would receive intel from the moon. The Lunatic Legion was still a threat. Cap would immediately begin to give the Avengers orders and asked Vision to call the reserve team to maximize their manpower. Warbird would tell Cap he didn't need them. She's been in this fight from the start and knows the battleground. Captain America would flat out tell her no. In response to this, Carol would quit the Avengers altogether. Minutes later, Wanda would watch Carol as she left.
There she goes, leaving for the second time.
Referring to the time Carol left the Avengers with Marcus under his mind control. Wanda felt as though the team failed Carol then, and they were failing her now. Long after the Avengers deployed to the moon to battle the Kree, Carol would stare at the moon from Earth. She would begin to self-reflect on all her accomplishments, then say to herself,
"What have you got now? No life and no prospects, all because of you."
She would then say no, believing that the team was the problem, not her. She accused them of having double standards, highlighting that Thor drinks mead and Hawkeye drinks beer. Filled with self-hype, Carol would decide to fly to the moon. At the moon, as the Avengers took down the Kree warriors, they would suddenly convert to pure energy. Quicksilver would deduce that the falling warriors' life energy was being used to power the Omniwave projector. As the Avengers fought on, Carol struggled desperately to make it to the moon. We then cut back to the battle. Cap would ask Iron Man to disarm the projector, but Tony would say he needs hours to study it. Cap would then ask Thor to open a dimensional portal, which he does. The plan now was to toss the projector inside. A Kree warrior would then blindside Thor with the universal weapon. With Thor unable to focus on holding the portal open, it began to shrink. Meanwhile, on the fringes of space, Carol's waning powers reached its limits as she started convulsing and began to fall. Back at the projector, Thor would defeat the warrior as two reservists, Justice and Firestar, would enlarge the portal and toss the projector inside, saving the day. Back on Earth, a defeated Carol would cry.
"I failed. Guess I just don't have what it takes. Oh God, I need a drink."
We next see Carol at a bar. In the background on television, a news report talks about the Avengers' heroics on the moon. Carol would say to herself,
"They don't need me. They don't need me at all."
One of the patrons would say to her that she's been staring at her drink for about 3 hours, then asked if she planned on drinking it.
"I don't know, Mitch. I don't know."
Months have passed since the moon battle, and we see Carol flying into Seattle. After quitting the Avengers, she decided to move there for a fresh start. She had a lunch meeting with an old friend named Tracy Burke. Carol was interested in returning to writing, and Tracy was an editor of a magazine. To celebrate her new life path, Carol would start to order Tracy a drink along with hers, but then remembered that Tracy had been 9 years sober. Tracy would comment that she never knew Carol to drink in the day, to which Carol would admit that her drinking has increased, but she had it under control. She was about to cancel the drink order until she saw a familiar face. Moments later, Carol would confront Tony for the first time since leaving the Avengers. Tony would tell Carol he tried calling her, but she never responded. He would then tell her that he was building a new house in Seattle. Carol would then cut him off, saying she already saw the big photo spread in the magazine about it. She would then ask Tony if he was following her on behalf of the Avengers or because he didn't think she was capable of handling her own problems. Tony would tell her that wasn't the case at all. The ground was broken for his house long before the Avengers got back together. Carol would respond saying,
"Good, then just stay out of my way. It's a big town. We can avoid each other just fine."
Tony would try to reply, but Carol would fly off before he could. Not long after this, Tony received a call from James Rhodes. He would tell Tony that he was sending him a news feed, which was live coverage of War Machine attacking a factory. At this point in Rhodes' story, he had retired from being War Machine, and the armor this imposter was using had supposedly been lost forever. Against Happy and Pepper's wishes, Tony decided to suit up and deal with this issue. Iron Man would eventually arrive and begin to battle the imposter. Not only was the imposter very skilled at using the suit, but Tony was injured in a previous battle, so every blow to Tony's armor caused great pain to his physical body. The fake War Machine would eventually get the upper hand, and Tony would go down. As the imposter prepared for the kill shot, he would be hit by a photon blast. The imposter would turn around to see Carol. She would say even though she didn't like Iron Man, she was not going to let him be murdered. Carol would then close the distance on fake War Machine and punch the armor's breastplate. The imposter would then turn invisible in order to grab the fallen Iron Man. He would then give Warbird a choice. Back off and let me destroy this factory or Iron Man dies. The temporary standoff gave Tony the opening to surprise the imposter with a blast of energy. With Tony free and clear, Warbird was able to get close and send the imposter flying with a right hook. He would then respond by firing a missile, destroying a good portion of the factory's roof. Tony would then fly at fake War Machine only to be pushed aside by Carol.
"Out of my way, Iron Man."
Tony would try pleading with Warbird that they should work together. Carol would then tell him she wasn't an Avenger anymore, so she wasn't under his authority. As expected, fake War Machine would get the drop on Warbird and Iron Man due to their uncoordinated attacks. Once fake War Machine got enough distance, he would complete his mission, which was to destroy the factory. Iron Man, wanting to get to the bottom of who this imposter was, would head home, telling Warbird to hold the fort and he'd be back. Carol would call this act cowardly. Fake War Machine would then punish a distracted Warbird by punching her through a concrete structure. Tony would eventually return with a device called a negator pack. In short, the device scans any construct for the presence of Stark technology, then destroys said technology. But strangely, the imposter simply removed the device and crushed it. Somehow, this guy was able to remove Stark tech from Stark tech. After punching Tony, the imposter would flee the scene. Tony would try to give chase, but due to his injuries, he would pass out mid-flight. Feeling sympathy, Carol would catch him before he fell. She would fly him back to his estate where Happy and Pepper were waiting. During this time, Tony would be told by Hank Pym that the Iron Man suit was killing him due to the energy fields the armor generates. If Tony wanted to live, he would have to give up being Iron Man. Later that night, Tony would receive a surprise visit from Carol. She heard about his condition and wanted to check on him. He would tell her he was being sent to a clinic. No avenging, no work, no anything. Carol would admit that she was wrong for hating him, and after seeing him fight beyond his limits and not quitting, it would be hard to label him petty or vindictive after that.
"I know you were trying to help me. I apologize for lashing out."
Carol would give Tony a kiss on the cheek and fly away. 6 months has passed since Carol and Tony last spoke. We find Tony chilling after a party. Pepper is upset that Tony has decided to work with Sunset Bane of Banetronics.
"I thought you suspected her of hiring fake War Machine."
Tony would tell Pepper the best way to prove Sunset is guilty is to find proof on the inside of Braintronic. Shortly after this, Tony would come across a bottle of alcohol. This would briefly cause him to reflect on his past drinking issues before he put the bottle down. "I need to be strong for my friends for the Avengers, and for people like Carol Danvers. We then come to see Carol engaged in battle with two villains known as Golden Blade and Sapper. During the battle, Carol would send Golden Blade flying into the stratosphere with a powerful photon blast. While on patrol, Iron Man would spot Golden Blade and bring him back to Carol. As Carol thanked Tony for the assist, Tony would conduct an infrared MRI analysis on Carol, and the suit detected alcohol. "Carol, you've been drinking." Warbird would then tell Iron Man she had it under control and that it wasn't a problem, pointing out the fact that she took care of the two villains. No sooner than she made that statement, Sapper would sneak attack Tony and drain his suit's power. Enraged, Carol would recklessly fire upon the duo. Once recovered, Iron Man would quickly take out Golden Blade, which caused Sapper to panic and fly to his partner's aid. Carol would give chase and quickly caught Sapper. Upon doing so, Warbird would begin to overload Sapper with energy. Iron Man would try to tell Carol to stop, but it was too late. Sapper's overloaded body would cause a massive explosion, sending Carol into the ocean. We next see Carol regaining consciousness inside of her apartment. She would ask Tony how he knew where she lived, before suddenly remembering she was in a battle. Tony would inform her that both villains escaped while he was fishing her out of the sea.
I really screwed up. If I'd been sober.
Tony would tell her that he knows what she's going through, cause he's been there. Carol would then ask Tony for help. Tony would stay up with Carol until dawn, consoling her. He would then tell Carol that he would be attending an AA meeting in a couple of days, and he invited her to join him. Carol would quickly reject the offer. She didn't need that kind of help. She could beat this herself. Tony would remind her that it takes more than just wanting to stop. 4 months after their last talk, Tony decided to visit Carol. Tony would meet Tracy Burt, who urged Tony to talk some sense into Carol. Carol was surprised by the visit as Tony could clearly see bottles of alcohol. "I see you're drinking again." Carol would say she didn't have a choice. She was on a deadline for her second book, and she believed she wrote better while intoxicated, and she figured she would use the alcohol professionally. Naturally, Tony strongly disagreed with this, stating it doesn't work that way. As expected, Carol would tell Tony to back off.
This is my life. I can handle it.
Tony would sadly watch as Carol downed a glass of liquor. He would think to himself how he wished he could make Carol realize what it was like when he had a drinking problem. Frighteningly, there was a part of him that wanted to join her. At that moment, Tony received an urgent call from a ship at sea. The vessel was being attacked by Sapper and Golden Blade. As Tony was getting ready to leave, Carol would quickly pour herself another drink, chug it, then say,
"Okay, let's go."
Tony would tell her she wasn't in shape to fight, but she would suit up and declare that Warbird was ready. Tony would then ask Carol, "Shouldn't you take care of that first?" As Carol turned to see what Tony was talking about, he would sucker punch her with a powerful left hook, knocking her out cold. He would then place her on the couch and leave. As he flew away, he hoped she would forgive him. Maybe. Carol would regain consciousness later on that night. She would soon remember what happened once spotting Tony's jacket. Enraged, Carol would finish off the bottle.
Trying to make me look bad again, Stark? Well, I'll show you.
Meanwhile, at Tony's place, he and Pepper Potts were enjoying the night air on the deck when suddenly a blast of energy caused them to fly back.
How do you like being taken by surprise, Stark? You're just a big can of pudding. Iron on the outside, soft in the middle.
Tony would tell Pepper to get inside as he activated full defense mode on his house. As Tony's armor formed around him, Carol would taunt him as she sent a powerful blast into the roof. Tony would fly it out of an underwater tunnel, leading Carol away from his home. Tony hoped with time and space he could get her to calm down. "Carol, let's talk this over. I know you're angry, but without warning, Warbird shot a blast at Tony, barely missing him, but tore a tree in half. Carol would catch the top half of the tree and toss it at Tony.
No talk! This is payback!
Tony would blast the tree, but Warbird would blindly and recklessly fly through the debris.
You're not stopping me that easy. Nothing's stopping me.
Tony watched in horror as Carol flew headfirst into a power plant. This isn't just a drunken rage. I think she's in a full alcohol blackout, Tony thought to himself. The point of impact was surging with electricity. Tony predicted that Carol was being hit with enough electricity to light half of Seattle, but Iron Man soon realized that Warbird was actually absorbing half of Seattle's electrical energy. Tony's eyes says it all. Carol was now overpowered and totally out of control.
Iron Man, you're dead!
Warbird would attempt to remove Iron Man's helmet, but he was barely able to hit her away. Iron Man would then receive a message that Ultimo had broken free. Capitalizing on his divided attention, Carol would kick Tony with all her might, sending him straight through the wing of a jet. Carol would go in for the kill, but quickly realized the jet situation. Tony would tell Warbird that he needed her help saving the plane and its passengers. Without hesitation, Carol settled alongside Tony and guided the plane to safety. Once the plane was landed, Carol would ask Iron Man, "What caused this to happen?" "Carol, you kicked me through the jet's wing." Carol would quickly deny this, saying she would never. "You were drunk, Carol. Out of control. You can't deny it anymore." Carol would then suddenly lose consciousness. Tony would then call for the EMTs, telling them to treat Carol for alcohol poisoning. When asked if he was sure, Tony would reply that he knows the symptoms. He would then fly away to face Ultimo. We next see Carol waking up in a hospital bed, not knowing how she got there. At that moment, a doctor would walk in and introduce herself. She would tell Carol that she's lucky to be alive. Thankfully, Iron Man called the EMTs in time. The doctor would go on to tell Carol that she's not sure how she was still alive. The large amounts of alcohol in Carol's blood caused damage to her liver and other internal organs, well past the normal limits of survival. The doctor would conclude by telling Carol that her luck wouldn't last forever. "You've put your system through hell, and if you drink again, you'll die. It's that simple." Carol would then ask,
"Where are my clothes?"
The doctor would then interject that Carol would need extensive rehab, or at the least, to spend a few days in a detox ward.
"Doctor, all I need is to get out of here. Now where are my clothes?"
We next see Carol walking the streets of Seattle after leaving the hospital. As she walked, Carol would come across a bar. She would stare at the sign, weighing her thirst against the doctor's warning. She would enter the bar, but before she could order, there was a breaking news report about Ultimo causing havoc in Spokane, Washington. But luckily, Iron Man arrived on scene, appearing to be the city's only hope. Tapping into her hero spirit, Carol would transform into Warbird to lend Tony a hand. But the mere act of transforming left Carol lightheaded and woozy. Realizing she would be no good to anyone in her current state, Carol needed a good power boost. Luckily, there were two electricians working on a live wire. Carol would grab the wire, absorbing a massive amount of electricity. After thanking the men, Carol would fly to the aid of Tony. While in flight, she realized that the power boost caused her to remember how drunk she was last night, as well as kicking Tony through the wing of a jet. We arrive in the midst of a battle as Iron Man, who now has allied himself with Golden Blade, tries to defeat Ultimo. Not knowing of the alliance, Carol would go after Golden Blade once arriving. Iron Man would step in saying, "He's on our side, believe it, or leave. I don't need any more trouble from you." She would admit she has a problem, and she wanted to make it up to him. Carol concluded by saying she's sober and just wanted to help. Seeing her sincerity, Iron Man would task Carol with getting a piece of equipment that would aid him in battle. Warbird would fly off telling Iron Man she won't let him down. As Iron Man and Golden Blade held off Ultimo, Warbird would soon return with the device. Warbird would then distract Ultimo long enough for Iron Man to attach the device to Ultimo. Iron Man would then link his suit to the device in order to shut Ultimo down from the inside. Warbird would congratulate Iron Man as they rescued bystanders. Sometime later, we see Carol walking towards a podium where she is greeted by Tony. "I'm glad you came."
Thanks, Tony, for everything.
Carol would then face the room and admit that she was an alcoholic. And that was Captain Marvel vs. Iron Man Beef History Origins Part 1. Stay tuned for Part 2 because it gets a little crazy. Perception is reality. None of this is real.